podcast, Rahul Kashyap from Silence talks about being a technologist in security world. So stay tuned. So welcome everyone to another episode of Future of Data podcast. Today we have with us Rahul Kashyap and a brief bio on Rahul. So Rahul Kashyap is a Chief Technology Officer at Silence, a venture advisor with Hive and founder advisor with EH Security. And prior to Silence, Rahul was a Chief Security Architect with Bromium. Rahul has written several security research papers, blogs, articles that are widely quoted and referenced by media outlets around the world. Rahul has been instrumental in building several security technologies, network intrusion prevention systems, host intrusion prevention systems, web application frameworks, whitelistings, and micro virtualizations. He has been awarded several patents for his innovations. Rahul is an accomplished pen tester and has in-depth knowledge of OS, networking, and security products. He is frequently featured in several podcasts, webinars, media briefings. Rahul has been speaker at several security conferences like Black Hat, Blue Hat, Hack in the Box, RSA, DerbyCon, and so on and so forth. And he was named Silicon Valley's 40 under 40 by Silicon Valley Business Journal. With that, Rahul, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Vishal.
Awesome. So I think one thing that I was seeing fascinating in your profile was your hands-on sort of background when it comes to security and rising your way into becoming a successful technologist in a security landscape. So why don't you walk us through your journey from your grad school, like what brought you here, and walk us through that.
Sure, absolutely. So I got into security by choice and not by chance. Way back in the late 1990s when I was in my grad school, I kind of chose security, that I kind of was very sure that I wanted to get into security. At that time, there was there wasn't a real security market or an industry the way it is well defined today. There were like few products, and we were like hackers trying to look cool and hack some code and stuff. That was kind of the norm at that time. Very different from how it is now around 18, 19 years later. Mm-hmm. So then I kind of I started off as an exploit writer. I used to write exploits because I kind of felt that I learned a lot from exploitation. It gives you a depth of understanding how systems work and how to bypass defenses and so on. That's kind of how I started, and then I got into building products in terms of how to solve these challenges. I found that I'm able to write an exploit and I can compromise machines and users. Now, how do I prevent that? So that's kind of how my journey started. I worked in one of the first few R&D technology security startups in Bangalore in India way back in the days, and I was responsible for writing a lot of products there, built it from scratch. It was a tremendous experience, just coming out of grad school and almost like a dream job. And ever since then, I've not really looked back. I've kind of continued to dabble with security, with network, endpoint, cloud, built several products, built several companies. I'm still as passionate as I was in my college days about security. So this job is like a dream job for me. I thoroughly enjoy it.
We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast. Interesting. And if you can talk about your current role as a technologist with Silence, right? So first, what is Silence for our audience, and then what does it mean to be a chief technology officer there?
Yeah, so Silence is a very interesting, unique company. I would say one of the first to introduce and leverage AI and machine learning for preventing cyber attacks. and the co-founders of Silence were senior executives at McAfee. That's where I met both of them. Very sharp technologists. So Silence approach is kind of a very interesting approach. So basically what happened was, when I was at McAfee and when we were all at McAfee, we saw that what was happening there was a big shift, a paradigm shift in how attackers and how attacks were evolving. So fundamentally, the existing technologies at that time was signature-based antivirus. You have an attack, you write a signature or a heuristic which can catch one or few variants of an attack. And it made sense way back in the days when the number of attacks was in thousands and tens of thousands and sometimes even hundreds of thousands. But now we are looking at attacks at an internet scale. There are billions of pieces of unique attacks. So that kind of changes the dynamics and puts the odds in the favor of the attacker, because now you can't cope up with the legacy way of doing things. It cannot be a manual human investigative process. So Silence came up with the concept that, ultimately it's humans who are writing signatures and they have an expertise. What if I can train machines to build signatures and be proactive in defenses? So they came up with the concept of using data science and AI, sophisticated algorithms to kind of build out a whole new technology wave, which is now a pretty big part of cybersecurity industry right now. So it's a very interesting concept. We have had some tremendous momentum, great response from the market and our customers. One of the fastest growing companies in the entire North Americas. So which shows kind of that there's a real legit problem to solve, and people were really looking out for something like this. And I'm coming to your question about as a chief technology officer, my role is kind of basically to kind of provide strategic direction and vision for the products and technology. I'm responsible for the cutting edge architecture implementations and building out teams to evaluate how can we scale the technology and take it to the next level. I'm also actively involved with customers, partners, and also with media many times to look at what problems we can solve and how can I take the company to the next level. So it's a pretty exciting role, keeps me busy day and night, and I know I love the entire company, the space, and the people here.
Interesting. Thank you so much for walking us through that, by the way. I do appreciate that. So I think one thing that I really found it fascinating was you started as an exploit writer, right? So you try to monitor and seeing what's happening, and then so pretty much like you are in the trenches doing things, and pretty much you have seen how the exploits have changed over the years or over the decades. So what are some of your thoughts around how, if you can walk us through how the type of attacks have changed and how the technology to cope up has evolved? Like if you can just walk us through, give us some insights of whatever you can share.
Yeah. It's actually very fascinating. So cybersecurity is very unique. It's a very fast, rapidly changing threat landscape. And every, I would say, 5 to 6 years, dramatically, it changes so dramatically that some of the even products get obsolete in the process of that. So like if you look at way back in the 1990s or early 2000, the kind of attacks were like worms. Worm propagation. You had Code Red, Nimda, Slammer, so some very fast and furious attacks which kind of cripple a bunch of infrastructure on the internet. Now you don't hear about worms at all. It's almost obsolete. It's very rare to come across worm, and that's because of the evolution of operating systems technology and embedding security in the stack of some of the OSs. So I would say in terms of some of the major dramatic shifts in the last 15, 20 years, attacks have kind of now heavily being focused on users. Spear phishing is a way to enter any large enterprise. And once you click on a malicious link and there's attack embedded in that, the attackers get in, and sometimes it could be via ransomware, it could be via different forms of attacks. And once they are in, they can cause a lot more damage depending upon what they are after. So one of the other major shifts is past to present is in the past, the attacks were not incentivized with money. Attackers were not really making money. Right now, attackers are incentivized. They want to make money out of cybercrime. So cybercrime is a parallel economy. It's a business, and so it's more dangerous now than ever, and it's probably getting worse, right? Some of the key shifts are changing from, I would say, worms to going to and targeting users directly and monetizing attacks. And now even there are attacks at nation state level, where different nations are targeting different nations. There's corporate espionage happening. So everything is going online. The internet has really is really deeply embedded in all of our lives. So security is something which has always been an afterthought. You build something and then you think about security as an afterthought. So that is kind of what has led to the situation where now we are in a scenario where, if you look at it, the attackers have nothing to lose. If I am sitting in a country where there are no legal laws and restrictions, I can keep on sending you millions of emails, keep on attacking you. All I need to have is like 1% success rate, and that's good enough for me. Right? I have nothing to lose. And so that's why I think this problem is something which is going to get worse, if not better. Sorry to say that, simply because the odds are in favor of the attackers and not the defenders. So, and then this is kind of why this has become a lucrative underground business. And now, in the more recent terms, it is much more easier to incentivize attacks using cryptocurrencies such as bitcoins and some of the other emerging cryptocurrencies. So attackers have various ways for money laundering, leveraging cryptocurrencies and converting black money into white and so on. So yeah, I would say it's a fascinating threat landscape. How it has evolved over the period of times. It is much more financially motivated, much more sophisticated, and since people are making money, they are investing time and effort to build better malware. So and I think this is there's a lot more we are going to see in terms of attacks and sophistication to come out.
Interesting. We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast. No, I think thank you for walking us through being an insider of how this industry is exploding. So now, your perspective as a watchdog, right? So you have been seeing this industry grow, and you have been on the side of keeping the IT asset secure. So now I want your perspective on how the IT interactions that you have been into has evolved over the time, because I used to remember that getting your antivirus up to date and all, it was a nightmare for an IT to sort of maintain all the patches in and all that. And now I think you are rightly saying that the threat is exploding. The amount, the magnitude, and sort of the signatures have it's hard to fathom with. So now, how had you seen the interaction changed when it comes to a technologist or as an IT folk interacting with say an insider like you? What have you seen as a shift in the dialogue between these folks?
Yeah, so I've spent quite a bit of time, I would say, at least with hundreds of CISOs and senior executives in terms of who implement and buy security technologies and products, in my journey as an entrepreneur in this space. And I would say one of the things which comes up now is, and what I also advise people is, you have to understand the attack surface. Look at the weak links in your environment and build a systematic, well planned out strategy to defend your environment. Once you kind of understand the perimeter and the boundaries and what you need to really defend, right? And I would say that the earlier thought when this whole cyber warfare or the whole attacks was increasing, the first reaction for a lot of people was just add more and more and more layers. You add one layer after another. And what has happened as a result of that, it worked to some extent, but as a result of that, it made the entire security implementation process much more cumbersome and complicated, to the point that now you need tools to manage the tools, right? So and then there is this perception that security adds complexity, and that's kind of also been a deterrent in terms of a lot of people evolving and kind of adopting newer technologies. So I would say smart layers are more architecture point. If you're not changing the cost to the attacker, you really cannot fundamentally change the equation in your favor. So understanding that smarter layers is going to be key, and implementing them. And just by adding more layers, it's a misconception. People are beginning to realize that by throwing more products and solutions is not going to solve the problem. So people are getting smarter, because there's a lot more awareness in this industry than what it used to be 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So people are understanding have much better understanding of this. So I think this is kind of one of the things which I see as a leading thought, which I think is positive. Smart layers versus more layers, and building and architecting solutions to kind of solve problems, and not just building temporary gates to kind of solve topical small problems. So yeah, I think that's kind of a thing which kind of is a leading strategy which comes up more and more often nowadays.
We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast. Interesting. And now let's talk about the leadership perspective. I think so. I was recently in a conversation with bunch of sort of entrepreneurs, leaders, and sort of the CEO branch, and so they are pretty much yelling at their CISO, saying that they are pretty much like a nagging bunch of lawyers nowadays. They're just asking me not to do things in 70,000 ways now, because threat has pretty much increased in all the dimensions. Now, and in one of the interesting sort of executives says that, hey, life has become harder for us because businesses are pretty much designed around the idea of cutting corners, finding those side hacks and sort of exploiting that to grow. But now with this sort of exploding landscape of security, and the line between the paranoia of a threat or an exploit vis-a-vis of the liberty to sort of go out and do your stuff, it's shrinking. That line is merging. So what is your sort of observation as a technologist, seeing this unfold in the business branches that you have interacted with? What's your thought?
Yeah, I think fundamentally the biggest problem which is plaguing security industry is that security is always an afterthought. When you are building something, you are not thinking of security. You just want things to go out somehow, and it later comes and bites you. If you look at the recent issue with the Intel processors, everybody wanted faster and faster processors. And now suddenly the entire landscape has changed to the point where it's become a huge problem, which is almost going out of control for big companies like Intel, right? So I think that is kind of the kind of the big problem underlying here, which is you have to think security early on instead of later to do damage control, because when you're doing damage control, it's too late. The cat is already out, and you are running around spending more money, more distracted than ever, trying to do damage control. And nowadays, you must have seen some of the mega breaches. In the last 5 years, pretty much every large brand you can think of has been breached, right? So and people lose a lot of credibility in the market. There's consumer confidence which goes down, and ultimately it is the consumers and the people who get affected by these mega breaches. Your credit cards get stolen, and then it's a hassle for the average person down there. So there are consequences of really not thinking out security strategies early on, and doing a knee-jerk reaction later on. So my advice to everybody is to make sure that if if you have an internet facing website, if you have if you have a profile where attackers might be interested in you, you have to assume that you will be attacked at some point. People have this almost like a naive assumption that why would anybody attack me,
Right.
which kind of leads to this problem. I have seen that.
Right. No, I think it's fascinating, by the way. So recently I remember talking to a CISO, and it's a very weird interaction. So he's a CISO at a bank, and he said that, Vishal, you know what? We are just it's actually very heartbreaking to hear his theory. So he said we are just the guinea pigs to, like, we are the first line who should be sacked once they see a security. And he sort of introduced me to this paradox of security leadership. He said that to secure an infrastructure, you have to be staying long enough to understand what's going on. And then many times when this security breach happens, the market demands to, like, the security had to be popped out and be replaced, right? And then the thing that kills security is the rapid change in its sort of framework itself, right? So, and they say it's a paradox. So now the business sentiment says, hey, you are hacked or you are breached, change the heads, right? But the head says, hey, you need to sort of create some appetite of keeping me on board so I can investigate enough. So he was talking about how the market mindset is not in line with the changed landscape of security. Like, what is your thinking on that?
No, I think it's true. I kind of joke with my CISO friend that this is the CISO musical chairs going on. You go from one place to another, and yeah, I mean, and sometimes when you have a publicly traded company or a public company with a public profile, you need someone. If there's a breach, you need to show accountability, and then there has to be somebody to blame, and generally it's the CISO. So it's also a high risk job, and he's absolutely right. So unless you are deep in the weeds and you understand things inside out, you will always have this fear that there is so much I don't know, and the fact that you don't know, is kind of makes your life even worse because you don't know what you don't know, right? So yeah, it is definitely a challenging role and a challenging job, and not to forget, they have tight budgets, tight timelines and implementation. It is a pretty challenging role, and I know I really feel for all the CISOs, but I've also have a lot of CISO friends who have done really incredibly well in those environments. So there's a lot to be learned from people who have already done this and been successful. So I kind of like to spend time with them and really have them share their experiences on what is it that worked, what is it that didn't work, and most importantly, can you sustain this period where you can manage your credibility in the market despite this being such a high risk, high profile job. So it's a very interesting gig, I would say.
Interesting. And I think so. One thing I certainly need your perspective on. So since you are in the trenches in data and you are seeing things getting secure, and you are actually on a provider end to this comfort of so-called security, now there has been too much. So I was talking to a few folks at NSA and a bunch of those the federal circle, and there was a huge hoopla around the ownership of data, right? So they said that to fix the security, they need to fix the ownership of data, right? So at least you can go and fix the right trenches, right? So if your business has holes, or your business loops or business processes has holes, security can do so much in fixing those, right? Security can just get some infrastructure layer around it, but if you have ways to work around it, so you'll work around it. So what have you seen as when it comes to the ownership, right? So do you have a perspective on like how does the ownership you are seeing that's happening today, and how would a business look at this ownership? Is it a problem?
You mean the ownership of data of users? Okay, yeah, I think there are several industries, and I've been pretty involved with the federal government here and the various intelligence agencies as well. They have some very fascinating technology. Some of it is really cutting edge to deal with some of these challenges. But yes, right now in this world, just in the last 5 to 6 years, I would say data has become king. Data. There's so much happening around data. You are building technologies, and so, but then everything relies on data, right? So who has access to the data, who has rights to the data, and how much data can you share, and how much of it is sensitive, right? So curating data is a challenge. So if you want to get data, you can be only as smart as the quality of data. If you get data which is not qualified or well thought of out of, it can just be more noise, right? So
Right.
and in the quest of that, you end up getting into sensitive discussions like privacy, user
Right.
privacy, and so yeah, I would say especially in the government and even the large enterprise, this is a big challenge which people keep on battling on a regular basis. In fact, countries in the Europe now have come up with a concept called GDPR to kind of curtail and manage some of this privacy concerns, and also have accountability when it comes to data breaches. So yeah, so there is I would expect that there'll be a bigger role of the government going forward when it comes to data, because right now, if you look at it, data is being managed by the top 4 or 5 companies, which is Facebook, Apple, Google, and now Microsoft as well, right? And which means that they have a lot more power because there are hundreds of millions of users using the products and the technologies and are depending on that, and they've already profiled and they have a lot more insight than anybody else, which means that they can move further along than anybody else, which gives them a huge competitive advantage. Not to forget the sensitive pieces of the whole user and the privacy piece, right? So I would expect that this to be an ongoing debate in the next few years, and at some point the government will start mandating certain guidelines on what you can do and cannot do, similar to GDPR, but probably with a different context and different scope. I expect that government those kind of regulations and guidelines to come out in the next few years.
Interesting. Wow. So thank you so much. I think that's really helpful. And another interesting area. So I when I was saying that, I recalled a conversation with one of the insurance guy here in Boston, and I was discussing this idea of securing the, like, how much of threat is a insurance problem, right? So I would rather just quantify it as a risk and just make it a business problem rather than the IT problem, right? Because we assume that maybe we cannot cope up with this evolving modes of threat. And he said that he actually pointed me to an interesting problem, and I want your perspective on that. So he said that, Vishal, with the SaaS and with cloud and the emergence of these services, now businesses are using sort of cloud, say for bunch of their asset management. Now for a cloud service, each asset has a digital, like it's quantified as a digital footprint, right? So whatever that the thing is, they can quantify the risk accordingly. But to a business, that asset means totally different. So there's a perception mismatch, right? So for me, that content means something, but for digital sort of, and he said that even when those lines are murky, when we come in as a specialty insurance, sort of quantifying the risk of this organization, we get into this debacle of, does the cloud services and how much they perceive to be the value, and how much sort of these businesses would perceive to be the value. Like, how would you as a technologist in a security company, have you seen those conversations? Like, have you seen those sort of confusions from your end in providing a patch and providing sort of the services for both the ends?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is what is the context behind data? How do you relate to data? Everybody has a different perception about what data is and what data means to them, and it's the varying degrees of opinions on data, which is kind of, I would say, the problem here. For an end user, I may argue that I'm giving my privacy to Google, and all I get is an email account. Right, they're tracking everything I'm doing. But for Google, they are making my life much more convenient. They're giving me insights and making me do things which I was not even thinking about earlier. They're making life easier for me. And then again, within Google itself, there'll be different teams who will be having access to different kinds of data coming from me as a user, which
Right.
are improving my maps experience, which is improving my health experience, which is improving my privacy, security, and so on, right? So, and my photographs, everything is out there with Google right now. So. So yeah, I would say the entire context and how you talk about data is they're all different perspectives, and everybody has their right and opinion to their own perspectives. That's the way I look at it. But ultimately, you have to look at what is it that you're taking from an end user and consumer, and what is the worst case and the best case scenario for them out of this. So worst case means that if this data gets breached, what is it that an attacker will have access to, right? So if you can curate data so that you build data which is relevant to you, relevant to the user, but at the same time not of much use for an attacker, if you can build out data paradigms using technologies in the security space, that could be one approach of making it something which is viable for both sides. Without leaking out too much information. But now, if say for example this goes in the hands of an attacker, and he knows all of my habits, when I come home, when I leave home, my timings when I drive, so they can do a lot of damage out of this. They can target me and kind of launch an offensive attack scheme against me. So yeah, so I think we have to be thoughtful about how we are looking at data and representing it, and not be just confined within our own perspective. So there has to be a bigger picture inside, so that people really understand that this is not my data. This is somebody else's data which I'm using to improve my business. Oh yeah, we are helping them, but at the same time, there can be consequences of this data going in the wrong hands.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
yeah. So,
No, I think that's pretty cool. So when I was looking at your profile, I think one thing that I find really fascinating. So security and chief technology officer, right? So we have been in a lot of interesting conversations where chief technology officers are not from security background, right? So they're always struggling to understand the security landscape. They're not basically cut out for a security. So now, and you working in that same industry sort of give me the perspective of if there's a best case of a technologist in a secure technologist, that would be you, right? So now I like from that perspective, I want some of your thoughts on best practices on. So if what are some of your priorities as a technologist when it comes to securing your enterprise, right? So what are some of the things? So if you look at an enterprise, how would you what are some of the best practices or your priorities to making sure the enterprise is secure as a technologist in that enterprise?
Yeah, I would say that is something in terms of you look at, understand the attacks, what are your assets, define them, and then in terms of how much people how much security, as I already mentioned about layers, people have had this concept of layers. So you need to start understanding that security is not a tool. Security is not a product. Security
Interesting.
is a process which requires expertise, architecture, implementation, and technology. So all of this have to be combined to kind of get the maximum out of any technology that you can that you play with and dabble with. So there's always been this requirement for an easy button solution, and those easy button solutions don't exist. That's a reality. No matter how much money you spend, ultimately it boils down to some of these very basic facts of life when it comes to security, right? So in the current threat landscape, I kind of like to define enterprise securities as climbing Mount Never Rest. You're you're always climbing, and you can never rest because the attacker dynamics and the tactics keep changing. You need to be prepared for the worst case scenario always. Technology plays a very vital role. And then you have to look at how can you make things simpler for yourself, and not more complicated, because ultimately it'll be people who will be using and implementing these technologies. And if you are not simplifying their lives in terms of usability, it's not going to work. It's not going to scale. So AI and machine learning are some of the interesting emerging areas which have a lot of promise. And because they simplify a lot of things using a different approach. So these, but then there are waves of these technologies which come and go. Right now, I would say dabbling with AI definitely has some is definitely showing some good promise.
Interesting, interesting. So that's pretty cool. So I think one thing that again, it's with a lot of tech CTOs and like a lot of technologists in industry. Sort of, we had this conversation about. So technologists' job is to sort of empower business to go out and sell more, to unleash their capacity and capabilities, right? So now on the other side, IT knocks on the door of technologists saying, no, 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 like don't do this or don't do that. So so one, I need a perspective on like how much security is enough. Like what is there any end state of being secure? Like or you say, hey, now I'm not seeing that much per dollar incentive of investing more time into this, and maybe there's a stop button there. We say I'm secure enough. Like is there anything like that you have seen or you believe in?
Yeah, so you can do continuous assessment and continuous evaluation of where you stand and grade yourself, but that's only a perspective. The way I look at it is that attackers who manage to get in means that they had a perspective which you did not have, and just imagine in a large company of say 100,000 users, if I send out everybody an email every day, which is a spear phishing email, what are the chances that at least 5 people will click on it, right? So you have to assume the worst also in many cases, that people will make mistakes. So you have strong prevention kind of technologies to make sure that they don't do any damage, because people will make mistakes. So having preventative solutions is going to be key. And at the same time, you couple that with a plan B, that in case something goes wrong in something, we couldn't block something early enough, there has to be a plan B to mitigate and respond to that quickly. So a combination of both of that can really help define a pretty clear, simplistic strategy overall in terms of a plan A and a plan B. Obviously, you need a plan C and a plan D as well. But just to get started, these things would be the bare minimum. And there is not, and it's not about having more and more security and more security products. It's about having more and more maturity of processes, maturity of the ability to leverage your existing investments and in what you have already invested in, and also investing in smarter technologies which simplify your lives and not complicate the IT user's life.
Interesting. No, I think that's well said. I think I totally agree with you. So sort of other thing that I almost talk to every technologist that I invite, or at least I get in conversation with, is the current state of technology, right? Almost every technology that we talk about is going through its own disruption, and disruption happens in S curves, right? So it happens rapidly, it happens quickly. It questions the idea of stability, right? So because everything is changing, and right now we are at a weird state where the things even my technology relies on is going through its own disruption, right? The business model that I'm relying on is going through its own disruption. There are a lot of things that are changing, and I'm sitting at this rapidly sort of vibrating when it comes to a business model or technology landscape. As a technologist, what keeps you sane? Like what keeps you on check when it comes to providing a stable core to a business, right? When you know the technology that you're relying on. I think we talked about blockchain in this conversation. We talk about cyber that's expanding. So almost every of these aspect is going through its own disruptions. So how would, as a technologist, you keep your business core to be stable?
Yeah, I think the world is full of distractions. There is always something interesting going on. It is very important to have focus and really the ability to understand what do I really care about the most, right? What is it that my business needs the most, right? There might be the next new shiny blockchain startup coming up, but is that really relevant for what I want to do, right? So I think kind of building kind of a fence around yourself, at least in terms of making critical decisions for the company and the team. I kind of like to draw those, I would say, some lines around there, so that I'm not running all around looking at every technology out there and trying to solve every problem, right? So to define the scope and the problem and the area, and then look at what is it my ability to execute on this. Do I have the team which can enable this vision and take it forward to the next level, right? So I think I kind of like to break things down and make it and simplify things when it comes to execution, and that comes by focus. So I'll go and choose that. Okay, this is the like AI in machine learning and data science is an area which can really solve and disrupt cybersecurity. So I will invest all my time to make it better and better, to the point where it is competitive in the market and it's solving real world problems. Yes, there is blockchain. I will definitely read about it, learn about it, but I will only use it when there is a legit use case for me to jump into that. But as of now, I think that focus and execution go hand in hand, and that's very key for me. As I'm building technologies and companies, you're absolutely right. It's very distracting. There is so much of technology there. There's so much of people are continuously innovating, and you almost keep on feeling that you're behind the race sometimes. But it's the way I look at it. It's not a race. It's a path, and you choose the path where you want to be.
Interesting. No, I think thank you so much for walking us through that. So now let's get to data science for a few minutes. So let's talk about data science in security. Like what are you currently seeing? And I see even in Silence case, you guys are touting the idea of using AI in machine learning in securing your assets, right? So what is the state of data science in now security? Like what are some of the trends that we are seeing and probably we will see as we go on to the future? Like what are some of the observations that you are seeing?
Yeah, I think it's early days in AI in the world of cybersecurity, and it's generally when we use the word AI, people have a perception about AI. It's about the robots taking over, and it's about it's heavily influenced by Hollywood, right?
Right.
So I kind of like to simplify and define the scope of when we say AI. What do we really mean by that, right? So broadly, what we have done is we have classified AI into like three broad categories. One is artificial superintelligence, which is the kind of what you see in the movies like The Matrix, where you have unlimited analytical power, you have perfect memory. Then you have artificial general intelligence, wherein you kind of for example, is about referring to a machine that is as intelligent as a human and equally capable of solving broad range of problems and reasoning, like for example the Turing test. And then you have what I call as the artificial narrow intelligence, wherein it's the computer's capability to and the ability to process vast quantities of data and detect patterns and relationships that would otherwise be difficult or impossible for humans to detect. So such data-centric systems are capable of outperforming humans only for specific tasks. Like for example, playing chess. So there's AI where you can play chess with an AI algorithm. And it's because the algorithm has learned all the possible moves. It's very specific, it's narrow, and it's focused, right? So similarly, I look at AI in cybersecurity. I kind of put cybersecurity in that bucket as of now. This is kind of where we are. It is very specific. You are curating and building out data models and data paradigms to kind of really build an AI platform which is very focused in the area of cybersecurity. And this could mean looking at network anomalies, anomalies in terms of viruses and malware and so on. And you kind of choose your scope which you want to define and curate.
Interesting. No, that's pretty awesome. So, so what is the future unfold for us? Like, what to expect in future when it comes to data science, AI, and security? Like, what are some of the places that we're heading? If you can just give us a glimpse of what's next when we think about security and AI or data science.
Yeah, I think first of all, there is this again. This every time there's a new wave of technology which comes out, there is skepticism and excitement at the same time. The excitement is, oh, it's it's going to solve with new problems and new skills. The skepticism is that, what about the old jobs? Will it replace the old people's jobs? And I would say that, and we have encountered this, most of us, at least in our lifetimes already. We have encountered similar technology leaps. Like, for example, when the personal computer came about, we all needed to learn Word and Excel versus the typewriter, right? And Word and Excel actually made us smarter, and made us more efficient when it comes to using resources such as, and go beyond the typewriter. Yes, people, some of the typists lost their skills, but they upgraded and they learned Word and Excel, and they could do a lot more, with those new skills, and had much more new opportunities. So I would say, in terms of this new wave of AI, it's kind of something like, just like nanotechnology, biotechnology, quantum computing represent the fourth industrial revolution. AI is kind of along those terms. I would say it's going to be a big movement going for us, where instead of losing jobs, I think it's going to create a lot more opportunities for people to upgrade and do their skills and do things better, and get more better, bigger results out of the same effort. So I am pretty positive about leveraging some of these technologies, and really unleashing some new capabilities which were not possible earlier.
Interesting. No, I think thank you so much for walking us through that. So one other thought that I seek your perspective on is, so we are seeing another interesting trend is distributed computing and asynchronous process. Right? We talked about bitcoins, we talked about like blockchain that's emerging, and there are a lot of technologies that are saying, okay, can I use through browser? Can I use my a piece of my GPU or CPU as a guest in contributing to the host's processes, right? As a security company, how much of that is like how much of it is a nightmare or an opportunity for you to sort of secure these interesting innovative business model, or at least use cases that are emerging, that are relying on totally discrete GPUs, like they're taking each GPU and each CPU in its own sort of niche, and then bringing it to solve a bigger problem. Like, how much of a challenge is this for security companies to keeping us secure?
You mean like GPU processing for mining currencies,
Right.
or?
So basically any processing, right? So nowadays, I can lend my processor through browser, or
Oh, I see.
blockchain is a typical example, right? So when you call out mining, ledger management, or whatever, right? So or SETA used to do it, like, so distributed computing or cluster or grid computing. So how would that landscape is now also emerging, where sort of like all of our cell phones could be used as a processor for certain tasks. How much of that is a challenge, or it's just a gimmick that probably will stay in its own at this point, or like what's your perspective?
Yeah. I mean, distributed computing, and the quest for people to get some of your CPU cycles has been there for many years. There have been several programs in the past which have I remember we used to look for extraterrestrial. There was a project called SETI, right? So a while back. So this has been there for many years now. There are, and now that there is some legitimacy in terms of sharing these resources, because if you look at the average PC, the average laptop which you have as a consumer is far more powerful than you really need it to be, right? So you have a lot of underutilized CPU or GPU cycles which are not being really used to its maximum capacity. So the whole idea is that what if I take can you lend me some of your cycles so that I could do some large-scale processing in the back end. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely some value in that. But in terms of security, I mean, I would want users to understand and know what they're really signing up for. because there could be a liability issue where somebody is actually doing something illegal behind the scenes, and you have no visibility of how your CPU or your resources were being used, right? So I could use your CPU and do millions of these machines and create a entire empire of bots, which can be used to launch attacks against countries and companies eventually. Right, so user consent is going to be key, and at the same time, explaining to a crisp explanation to the user of what that really means and what you're really signing up for is also going to be key, because many users would not really know what all of this means, right? Or this is all mumbo jumbo for a lot of people, right? So you have to have an honest conversation with people and let them know what you're really trying to do with these resources. And if all of that is clear, I mean, you could possibly use some of these technologies for distributed computing and leverage it for a better cause.
So now, thank you so much for walking us through that. Let's talk about you for a minute. And again, I do appreciate you being very candid and walking us through sort of all these interesting perspectives of a technology and security landscape. Now, what are some of the tenets of your success? Like, if you can share as a technologist, what are some of the ingredients that really you find useful when it comes to sort of being where you are today? Like, if you could share with our audience.
Yeah, I would say, look at the basic things. Life is about simple things and not complicated things. You have a goal, you have an objective. Be focused. Some of the most important things is you have to be fearless in taking risks in your life. And fearlessness comes from being fearless comes from having confidence in yourself that no matter what, it's not the end of the world. So I continuously keep on reminding myself with the simple quote, which I kind of literally created on my own, which is, it goes like this. Sometimes in life, when things are not going your way, it seems like the world is coming to an end. And you know what? The world is not going to come to an end. And if it did, it wouldn't matter anyways, right? So it's a simple one. I kind of always look at try to simplify things. How can I simplify my life? I kind of ask myself questions like, if I take this action, will it complicate my life or will it simplify my life? If it's going to complicate my life, I generally don't do those things, because it's ultimately my aim in life is to have a simple life, so that I can enjoy whatever I've kind of worked hard for so far. So that's one of my guiding principles, which I always follow. And then other than that, I would say, so on the other practical stuff which I've learned is always make sure that you are learning continuously. When I started off in cybersecurity, it used to be very different, and now the entire threat landscape has dramatically changed. So I have had to continuously upgrade myself and keep on learning. So never be afraid of learning and taking on new things. Next is get a mentor for yourself. No matter what you do, there's always something better. There are better people than us who have seen this and played this. So make sure that to increase your own self-awareness, get someone who's there to criticize you and critique you in a way to make you better. Sometimes it could be your wife, it could be it could be your parents. It all depends, right? So yeah, those are, I would say, some very important things, which are lessons I have learned in my life.
Interesting, and thank you so much for being for sharing us with that. One more question I ask almost every guest is to share an interesting piece of read that either they're reading or they like or they want to share with the audience. So do you have a favorite read for our audience?
Yes, I'm a voracious reader. I read a lot. One of my favorite books, which I kind of read, I think I read this last year, was a book called Mindset, the Psychology of Success by Carol Dweck. She's a professor of psychology at Stanford, I think. It was a fascinating read. It talks about how mindsets actually influence the way we think, the way we act, and ultimately who we become. There's a concept of fixed mindsets versus a mindset where you are open to changes and open to learning. So people who have a mindset, which is open and more adaptive, actually go further along in life than when you have a fixed mindset of being. Right. So it's a fascinating read. Psychology, cognitive psychology is one of my passions, which I like to pursue as a hobby. So this is one of my favorite reads.
Interesting. Beautiful book, and I think I think I read it. Yeah, I think so. Thank you for sharing that. Now we're almost at the end of the conversation, and Rahul, thank you so much for being super candid and walking us through the mindset of a technologist from a security landscape. Before we part ways, I definitely want your perspective on any closing remark that you want to share with our audience or our listeners. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I would say first of all, thank you for for having me on this show, and for those of you listening, thank you for listening. I hope this was useful. I would say that from a cybersecurity perspective, we are at a threshold. We're at a point in the industry where we need people, we need expertise. So cybersecurity needs more people and talent. So if you are interested in cybersecurity, feel free to reach out. You have my LinkedIn. I can share my LinkedIn link as well as my Twitter account. And we are looking at solving this challenge with using data science. I'm sure there are various new avenues which are yet to be explored. So people who have ideas, feel free to reach out and share. And I would really welcome that. So I'm looking forward to collaborating with people and taking on this big challenge in the industry.
Awesome. And with that, thank you so much, Rahul. Wish you nothing but success and luck, and keep doing an amazing job. And we are honored to have you on the podcast. And you're always welcome to come back and share your story, how it's progressing. We'd love to know, love to keep in touch. And thank you.
Thank you.
I thought I was sick of home, but actually I was homesick. Never really knew that I would have to grow up so quick. I'm so uncomfortable, don't know anybody here. Just a couple dudes that I met once, that's it. And I go into the booth feeling nervous. Got butterflies in my stomach like I'm so worthless. Is the mic on? I don't know how to work this. Inside I'm breaking down, I hope I'm not up on the